The Democratic caucus just concluded. We were honored today to be joined by two institutional giants who've been observers of this process, who have done an extraordinary job over the many years that they have observed Congress, and today addressed the Democratic caucus. And you'll be hearing from Dr. Thomas Mann and Dr. Norman Ornstein. Our members were inspired and also have their sleeves rolled up and prepared to go out and act so that we can take back this Congress and set a different course for the country. George Washington, in his farewell address, warned that he was always concerned about the impact that political parties might have, even though he certainly was aware during his time of the Federalists and Anti-Federalists, certainly aware of the differences between the agrarian South and the industrial and mercantile North, and recognized that there would be differences and acknowledged that tension. But what he warned about and was most concerned in his farewell address is that if partisanship and if Congress found itself where there was a party at war with its own government, and what we see unfolding as we approach yet another economic cliff, where this Congress has done little to address the major problems that we face, and with so little time that's left on the calendar, it's extraordinary that we could face another situation like we did last summer, where we saw what inaction and, in fact, a gross misunderstanding about what the economy and the nation need took place, causing the nation's credit and markets to falter. This is serious business that the nation has to address. The American people, still 14 million of them, are out of work, and yet we can't get the President's jobs bill to the floor. We've debated more than 31 times the repeal of the health care bill, but we can't get a jobs bill to the floor. We're grateful today that we've been joined by two of our institutional experts who, frankly, took a lot of courage because they have meted out blame for this institution rather equally over the years. Except we've reached a point, as Paul Begala would say, of false equivalence in terms of what's happening here in Washington, D.C. And with that, I want to thank them for joining us and ask them to come to our remark, and then we'll have our Vice Chair close, and I'll ask Norm Ornstein to address first.
Thanks very much, John. Tom Mann and I were delighted to accept the invitation to appear in front of the Democratic caucus. We would be delighted to accept an invitation to appear in front of the Republican conference. Over the years, we've worked together with people in both parties. John Larson and I worked together to try to deal with the problems of continuity of government and assuring that Congress was vibrant in the event of a dramatic terrorist attack, along with people like John Cornyn in the Senate. So we don't come here as partisans. Our book is blunt. Over the 40-plus years that we have been in Washington, as John Larson said, we have not been shy about calling both parties to account to try and improve the way the institution operates. We care first and foremost about the institution and the system of governance. This particular time is the most dysfunctional that we've seen. Tom and I came here 43 years ago in the fall of 1969 as congressional fellows to work on Capitol Hill, and we have never seen it this dysfunctional at a time when the problems facing the country, short and long term, are acute. And in this instance, the blame is not there to be meted out equally. We don't want to see anything other than two vibrant political parties. We are not against partisanship. It's part of our system. We want parties, though, that focus on problem solving. And if the goal is short-term political advantage over acute problem solving, then we've got a bigger problem. And that's part of what we addressed with the caucus today and part of what we address in the book. Thank you.
Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I heartily endorse everything Norm said. I just want to add one element to that. No doubt about the public being down on Congress and Washington and American government and politics more generally. But what has struck us is the extent to which the public doesn't really have much of a clue as to why. They throw up their hands and say, they're all to blame, they're all awful, the system's broke, there's nothing we can do. And then we started looking, so why does the public believe that when the underlying reality is profoundly different than that? Well, there are a number of reasons for that, but a really important one is the sense among those who sort of report on, monitor, analyze, watch the institutions of government is to be fair and balanced. And they also operate in an environment of intense partisan media oversight of their work. And so the best way of dealing with this is to say, he said, she said, is to say, well, the Republicans have done this, but then the Democrats are equally to blame. That is imposing an artificial equivalence on an underlying reality that is as different, as asymmetric as one could want. This is not a partisan book. It's not a book of political spin. It's not a book designed to help one party become the permanent ruler of the Congress or of American government. It's designed to help the public understand what's driving the dysfunction and deadlock, how in fact, as John said, and as George Washington warned, we have a political party at war with government, reflected in many, many ways. And I think our book forcefully but dispassionately and analytically sets out that case, assembles the evidence, and pleads with the public and those who claim to inform the public to think about what's going on and to act accordingly.
Thanks, Tom. And to underscore that and introduce our vice chair, Harry Reid took to the floor just moments ago and was down there reading an op-ed that was published by these gentlemen, and Mitch McConnell proceeded to the floor to block him from reading these comments. I think that pretty much says it all when you look at it's even worse than it looks. But indeed, I would like to point out that they end on a very positive note in terms of what America can do. And it isn't, as both of them point out, about there is a false equivalence here, but it isn't an attempt to have one party succeed over the other. It's an attempt to bring America together and do the institutional things that we need to do in the face of so many important things in such a short period of time that prevail upon all Americans, and especially those of us who take an oath to serve the people of this country, that we act. And instead, we have not. Javier Becerra.
Mr. Chairman, it was a treat to have Dr. Ornstein and Dr. Mann address the members in the Democratic caucus, and we thank them for having come. I don't think there's an American who's run for elected office who hasn't done so with the intention of getting things done for the American people. I think we all believe we have some good ideas and want to share those with our country, but ultimately we want to get things done. And so let me first urge our friends and our colleagues in the Republican conference to accept the invitation of these two gentlemen to go address them. Sometimes it helps to eat your spinach and listen to what those who are observing the work that we do, what they have to say. And so I think it was helpful to our caucus, Democratic caucus, to listen to Dr. Ornstein and Dr. Mann tell us about the institution that we so much love. And I think it would do our friends and colleagues on the Republican side a great deal of good to listen as well. But there's no getting around what these two gentlemen have said. The operative word is dysfunction. When this Congress has less favorability, less support from the American public than Richard Nixon had during the height of Watergate, you know something's wrong. And when you take over 30 votes to do the same thing over and over again without succeeding at the cost of about $50 million in taxpayer dollars, voting to repeal without ever trying to replace the historic health care reform that passed in 2010, when you twice vote to end Medicare and cost seniors a great deal more in their out-of-pocket costs for health care, when you come very close to shutting the government down on numerous occasions, and for the first time in our history, threaten the credit rating of our country and the downgrading of our credit, you know that something's wrong. And I believe all of us should be ready to work to get it done the right way. And so listening to two individuals who've devoted most of their careers to trying to help American democracy not just flourish, but become the example for the rest of the world would be worthwhile for us all. And so perhaps what we should do as we try to achieve what we, I believe, all set out to do, which is to get things done, is to perhaps listen to some sage, dispassionate, nonpartisan words of observation from those who have a great deal of experience doing that for both Republicans and Democrats. With that, perhaps we'll get something done, because after 560 days in Congress, where we have yet to see a jobs agenda move forward, where we have yet to see real work done to get the economy back on its feet, we have now less than 25 days of legislative voting to go, according to the Republicans in the House of Representatives. And it would be very helpful to make sure that between now and the end of the year, with just 25 days left of voting, according to the Republicans and their calendar, that we try to get things done. And so perhaps one of the best ways to do it is to get these two gentlemen to talk to everyone in Congress and see if we can get some sanity back into this institution.
Take some questions. Chad?
Just to start off, the defense sequester is looming. Your district obviously relies very heavily on the sequester. There's going to be a lot of debate about that in the next couple of days. The Vice President was here yesterday talking to the Republicans about this. Is there...
Former Vice President, not Vice President.
You're probably happy about that. In any event, is there an avenue to somehow replace the sequester and not have these, massive across-the-board cuts?
Sure, there was
impact your district, but
sure.
But what is the way to do it when Congress,
sure.
for Tom and Norm here have demonstrated they can't do anything?
Well, I would point out that in the Democratic budget that we deal with the issue directly, and in the both Democratic budgets that Mr. Van Hollen has presented, both times have dealt with the whole issue of sequestration, not only from a defense perspective, but it's equally as important in my district on the domestic side in terms of the number of individuals that have been impacted. So we feel very strongly that we have an alternative, that we've addressed it. We feel that this should be avoided. And let me say that this is an artificial issue that's in front of us because of the taking us to the precipice of economic default last summer that the Republicans did on something that 17 times under Ronald Reagan, 8 times under George Herbert Walker Bush, 6 times under George Bush, everybody recognized that you have to pay your bills. But instead we ended up with a special select committee that then imposed sequestration. So there are consequences to be paid. The Democrats addressed that in our budget. I'm proud of the work that Chris Van Hollen and this caucus has done to address it. And I don't know if you want to add something to that.
I'll just add this. The Budget Control Act was strong medicine, but it was bipartisan. And what it said is, if you can't get your act together bipartisanly, bicamerally, then this is the medicine that America must swallow. absolutely, we can make it better. Do something better than just having across-the-board cuts under the Budget Control Act and the sequester. But it has to be done bipartisanly, because bipartisanly the bill was passed that requires that strong medicine. And so between now and the time that we're supposed to finish our work, can we get this done? Absolutely. But you can't get it done partisanly. You can't pass a bill partisanly and expect it to become the law. You have to have it done bipartisanly, sitting together, and do it bicamerally as well.
As a member of the super committee, when you were appointed to that committee about a year ago, do you think we would be facing the sequester in late July?
No. Mother of missed opportunities. We had a chance. Think of it this way. There are 535 elected representatives for this country's 310 million people. 12 of us were given the powers of 535. Without all the constraints procedurally that the Senate has to go through, without having to go through the commotion of trying to rally 218 votes in the House, 51 or 60 votes in the Senate, 12 of us, all we needed to do was come up with 7. There was a very direct, facial, bipartisan solution that the super committee could have come up with. This place, as I think Tom and Norm have said, has become a partisan workshop. And it's unfortunate because the work of the American people is not getting done. And the American people are so far ahead of the politicians when it comes to how to get this done pragmatically.
The Vice Chair is far too modest as well, because the Democrats also, unfortunately, we could not get bipartisan agreement, but indicated that there was a path forward even back then, especially in face of the 14 million people that are out of work. We said very clearly that job creation equals deficit reduction. But our pleas went unadhered. The President then said, well, let me introduce a bill last September, which we wholeheartedly brought to the floor, that has still not been taken up. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, a question for Mr. Mann and Mr. Ornstein. So what would be your prescription for Congress dealing with the fiscal cliff right now? What should they be doing differently? Are there any signs of moving in the direction that you're hoping? I'm just wondering how your, the thoughts you've laid out in our book would apply to the current situation we're facing, given the concerns about the economic drop-off that would be the consequence of the end of the year.
I'm not sanguine at this point. Getting back to the super committee, which was like, if you think you've got this deep dysfunction, what can you do to create some opportunity to force action and bring people together? Creating an Avengers of Congress group that has, to mix all of the metaphors, a sort of Damocles over its head. If it doesn't come together, it would be difficult to devise a better approach. But I looked at the committee, and the first thing that I looked for was the choices of the leaders. And I thought, if Mitch McConnell picks just one of the Gang of Six, and I don't care which one, Tom Coburn, Mike Crapo, Saxby Chambliss, we got a deal. Yeah. And he didn't. Studiously avoided them. Now, these guys are not moderates or liberals. They're strong conservatives, and I believe what Tom Coburn says when he says he's the most conservative member of the Senate. But they wanted to solve the problem and recognized, as every outside group has done, that revenues have to be a component of it. So we fail on that front, and now you're facing these ridiculous, destructive sequesters. They were set up to be ridiculous and destructive, and the domestic ones are just as bad as the defense ones. And now, can you find an institutional mechanism that forces action? I'm just skeptical that it's going to happen, certainly not before the election, unless a couple of things happen. And I think they have to come from outside. One of the things that so disappoints Tom and me is that the business community has been absent without leave. As we saw with the debt limit debacle, I talked to large numbers of members of Congress and said, well, how many CEOs came to you and said, you can't let this happen? And I still have to, I have not found one who said, well, I had CEOs come to me. In a couple of instances, they said, well, they were there to lobby on something else and said, oh, by the way, this debt limit thing, that's crazy. When I see how the markets are reacting to the possibility of the disaster that the fiscal cliff will bring, it says to me that they're clueless. If you get a market reaction, then I think you may force some action. But that action has to be along the lines of the 3 templates that we've had out there. There are a lot of variation that we can use. Simpson Bowles, Rivlin Domenici, Gang of 6. We know what has to be done, and there are deals to be pulled off the shelf that are ready to be had. But the possibility of getting something done until right before the end of December seems to me to be very tricky. And of course, the other problem I would simply raise is that we're not just looking at sequesters that take place on January 1 and then all of a sudden you have an effect. Already agencies are having to plan for the possibility of mindless across-the-board cuts. So we're going to start to see contractors laying off people and agencies planning for the worst case. Maybe that will jolt outside forces like the business community and the markets to reacting, and maybe that will bring some action inside. But I don't see any planning, including the days left in session, that would lead us to be optimistic.
You know, there's an assumption people outside Washington and Congress make, well, this would be such a disaster, of course they'll reach an agreement at some point, but of course that's not true at all. The most likely scenario is nothing is done before the election, and in the lame duck there is a form of a short-term extension. But that itself will depend on who wins the presidential election and how that takes form. But I simply think the Republicans remain too dug into their no new tax pledge. That is the major obstacle. Norm described the consensus outside on what needs to be done, but you know, even they have to finesse it. They can't say tax increases. They have to say more revenues achieved through tax reform. That's a euphemism, which itself is really perverse. I mean, it's sort of lacking in honesty. But underneath those words and terms are a recognition that A, we need economic growth faster than we have now. We can borrow money for nothing to build infrastructure, which will pay itself back many times over and put people to work. And we can help out state and local governments that continue to cut because of the constraints on their budget. That's just simple, basic, common sense economics, and that's the start to a program. And then with that, obviously, I mean, I want tax reform too. There are whole ways of doing so, but one simply have to acknowledge that federal taxes are now at the lowest level they've been in at least 60 years, and they're going to have to increase. And once the Republican Party can step back from that, then there's a chance of making an agreement. And what the Democrats are doing now with in effect, the threat of letting all of the cuts expire if Republicans won't negotiate on the terms of it is trying to neutralize the harmful effects of the no new taxes pledge, because then, of course, the base is down to where it was before George Bush's tax cut changes.
Yes,
so,
go ahead.
since you blame Republicans, are you urging Americans to vote for Democrats?
No, we're not. We're urging Americans, and you'll see we lay it out in the last chapter of our book. We say what voters have to do and how they have to think strategically. Part of it is with individuals. Don't elect, we say, people who claim to be non-politicians and willing to stand on principle and never compromise. That is an ingredient for absolute gridlock and is counter to what the framers had in mind. But we also tell them, you have got to think more broadly about the system. Democratic theory says if a party wanders too far from, if you will, forgive me the term, the median voter, then the electorate will pull them back. by sending clear signals. So that voters have to see if they agree with what we note in the Republican Party and figure out some way to send a signal to bring them back. But it's both individual members, it's sending messages about what they want their own party to do in the months and years following the election.
I just want to add, there are no angels here. We're not saying that we've got one terrific party and one awful party and voters should throw out the awful ones and bring in the good ones. But there's a real difference now between the parties, which are by nature partisan, which seek electoral advantage, which operate in a rough and tumble political process that's designed to have a lot of disagreement. But you've got one party that's more oriented now towards solving problems and another that has gone a little bit astray. And we're not going to urge people to eliminate a political party. And as Tom said, what we'd like voters to do is to try to get to those people of both parties who they will elect and get a pledge that their first priority will be to find compromise to solve problems for the country. That now especially, that's what's important. We expect that we will continue to have a conservative Republican Party. We want a vibrant conservative Republican Party. We've got lots of friends on the Republican side who are very conservative, but who are a part of the bipartisan problem-solving caucus. One of the problems that we have now is here in this body, those Republicans who are a part of the problem-solving caucus have had the door locked. They can't get into that caucus. And if they try to get in, they will find their hands chopped off by the Club for Growth in a primary challenge or through ostracism in their own conference. And what we want to see is a changed party, not a party that necessarily gets targeted simply for defeat.
Thank you very much.